A new fantasy football season is almost here. But first, we have to look back at last year's mistakes. What did we learn, and how do we avoid some of those mistakes this year? That and much more coming up on the Fantasy Football Fellowship podcast. This is the Fantasy Football Fellowship podcast, the show that unpacks fantasy, faith, and life. I'm Bryce Johnson. You will love today's guest co-host because he is a former permanent co-host on this show, Harrison Zuckerberg. We will say hello and welcome back to him in just a moment. Hopefully you listened to the debut episode for this season last week. And so if you missed it, be sure to catch up on that one as I gave a season preview for Fantasy Football Fellowship, as well as the fantasy season and some of my initial thoughts. We will dive even deeper today as we look across the league. What teams are we most excited about to draft players from those teams, and maybe players that are most valuable, you get good value for kind of where they're being drafted so far. So we're going to take a look at that. Harrison is back to share the players that he believes are most legit. And so you'll definitely want to stick around for that. And as I mentioned on last week's show, Harrison, job change and all that, he's not going to be able to be a part of the show during the season. But thankfully, he's got some availability in July. And so we're going to do a few episodes with him to help preview the season and prepare for drafts. And so excited to have him back for that. Also, we are scheduled next week to have Andy Holloway from the Fantasy Footballers on this show. And so look forward to catching up with him. And then starting in August, we'll have our new co-host on this show, Trip Smith. And so excited to have him a part of things as well. Aaron is our producer. Glad to have him with us as well. And man, we are thrilled for another season of Fantasy Football Fellowship. If you are not a member yet, we encourage you to go to fantasyfootballfellowship.com. It is a free membership. We have made membership free this year, and throughout the season, we will provide you and your league. This is designed for your league to participate all season long in fantasy content that takes fantasy concepts, relates them to the Bible, relates them to life. We call them breakouts, and they are designed to be discussed amongst your league at league meetings all season long. And so it's fun to participate, whether at your church or your home league, your neighborhood league, work league. We've got you set up. So check it out, fantasyfootballfellowship.com for more information. And we begin today's show with this week's breakout. And so I want to take a quick look at last year. And in some ways, it's important for us to consider this as we prepare for this year's draft as well. But the reality is, if we think back to this time last year, and especially in August, when we actually probably have most of our fantasy drafts, we know that we made lots of mistakes. We know nobody has a perfect draft. That's the reality. You're not going to hit on every breakout wide receiver. You're not going to hit on every rookie running back. You're going to whiff on when you took a quarterback. It's just going to happen. But we look back, and so how do we respond to the mistakes that we made last year? And I'll be honest, here's my biggest mistake I made last year. I decided to keep running back Cam Akers in the 5th round. So I only get in my main league 2 keepers. One of them was Cam Akers in the 5th round. Well, I thought he was going to play for the Rams. He didn't play for the Rams. He got cut. Or trade. I can't remember how he ended up in Minnesota, but he was off my team, and in Minnesota, it was a nightmare. So it was a big mistake for me. So what do I learn about that? Okay, well, I expected him to make this big leap, and I bought in maybe a little bit too much to the hype with the Rams, and I overlooked Kieran Williams. And so that was a big whiff for me last year. So it was a mistake. Now, here's the temptation for me and for you as you think back to the mistakes you made in fantasy last year. There's regret, there's shame, there's I can't believe it, I stink at fantasy. You start buying these lies, right? You're like, oh, I'm going to make mistakes again. Like, oh, now you get nervous. Now you're nervous to take certain players. And so you have to wrestle with all of this as a fantasy manager. But we're here to encourage you, to help you make wise decisions this season and learn from those mistakes. What are the lessons learned that we now can incorporate into this upcoming draft? And the good news is, hey, it's a new draft. It's a fresh start, especially in redraft leagues. You completely start over. And even in keeper leagues, you make some adjustments and there are new opportunities. And so the parallel for us today is obvious. We know that none of us are living perfect lives. We have made mistakes and will continue to make mistakes in life. But today I want to focus on our past mistakes, the ones that we made even a while ago, and how many of those mistakes are continuing to cause us shame. And they're continuing to say, you're always going to make mistakes. You're going to continue to make that mistake. And in what ways is it preventing us from moving forward and to make good decisions next, right? The next opportunity, where we're so bogged down by past mistakes, past failures, that it's really, holding us back or derailing our life to a certain extent. And so, of course, we want to learn from these mistakes. What are the lessons learned? We think back. But for us as followers of Jesus, and here at Fantasy Football Fellowship and Unpacking It, we're all about being, we're sports fans who follow Jesus. And the good news of Jesus is that he forgives us of our past mistakes. And because of his grace, because of his love, because of what he did on the cross, we now move forward cleansed from unrighteousness. When we ask for forgiveness, when we surrender our lives to Jesus and we experience that grace, that mercy, and we now look back at those mistakes differently, not with shame, but in some ways we can grieve those mistakes. Just like Cam Akers, I can grieve that to a certain extent, but that's not who I am. Like, that's no longer, I'm not stuck to Cam Akers the rest of my life. All right, it was a mistake, I move on. And so for us, we now realize, man, my identity is in Christ. Who I am is a forgiven, loved son, a child of God, and my hope and trust is in Jesus. And so for us today, let's look at a couple scriptures and then we'll hear from Harrison. But the encouragement for us is to move past shame, rest in God's grace, and embrace the powerful hope and assurance that God gives us in his word. And so let's jump into 2 Peter 1:4-9. In view of all this, make every effort to respond to God's promises. Supplement your faith with a generous provision of moral excellence, and moral excellence with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, and self-control with patient endurance, and patient endurance with godliness, and godliness with brotherly affection, and brotherly affection with love for everyone. The more you grow like this, the more productive and useful you will be in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. But those who fail to develop in this way are short-sighted or blind, forgetting that they have been cleansed from their old sins. And so we want to move forward, not continuing to make the same mistakes, not, being stuck in the shame of our past mistakes, but growing in our faith, growing in our understanding, learning from those lessons, and becoming more and more like Jesus, cleansed, forgiven, walking in grace, resting in grace. And so now we become, fruitful followers of Jesus. And so that's the opportunity. And so paralleling it to fantasy, we move forward as better fantasy managers, ready to make better decisions, wiser decisions, and become, more fruitful fantasy managers. And so that's the hope for us today, both on the fantasy front as well as the faith front, that we can have a whole new outlook on life, and that Jesus truly helps us make the right choices when he empowers us to be better than we once were. And so failures from our past don't have to lead to the same failures in our future. And so I hope that's encouraging for you today. And so these are the breakouts. These are the type of topics that we'll talk about here on this podcast all season long. And then also the written breakouts are available on fantasyfootballfellowship.com for free. And those will officially begin the new season in September. So we're excited for that. All right, Harrison, we welcome you back to the show. He's Harrison Zuckerberg, has been a part of Fantasy Football Fellowship for a number of years, and we're excited about all that he has going on in his future. But for now, he's still with us. He's still a part of things. Harrison, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Bryce. Cannot wait for fantasy season to start. This is like the worst month of the entire year right now, where as much of a baseball fan as I am, it's painful only having baseball on. No basketball, no football, no hockey. I need football season to be here. Can't wait to get back into fantasy. And, I'm just super excited to see what the upcoming season has in store.
Absolutely. Well, it's mock draft season.
Oh,
I'm,
yeah.
I'm, I'm almost mocking daily, trying to get a quick mock in here and there. You try different strategies, and so it's fun. And this is the time right now where we're doing a lot of research and really looking back at last year. That's kind of where we're at right now. Once training camp begins, now you're reading news and notes and updates from training camp and trying to read through the tea leaves and in between the lines and all that kind of thing. But really it is reflecting on last year. And so that's why, kind of starting with, all right, what were the mistakes we made last year, learning from those. And so from a fantasy perspective, Harrison, what was your biggest mistake last year and maybe biggest lesson learned that you're taking into a fresh season of fantasy?
Yeah. My biggest mistake last year was definitely being too wary of waiver wire ads and not jumping on the bandwagon early on some guys who clearly were performing, but maybe they were rookies and we didn't really know what to expect, like Puka Nacua and CJ Stroud. I remember week 1, Puka Nacua has his, incredible 10 reception game, and everyone rushes to the waiver wire. It's like, oh, I got to get Puka Nacua. He's going to be incredible. But it's like, okay, well, Cooper Kupp's out. Maybe let's not put all of our, waiver wire budget on a 5th round rookie week 1 just because of one great game. Like, let's wait and see. Well, you couldn't wait and see because he was on people's roster by the next week and was a top 10 fantasy wide receiver for the rest of the season. Same thing with CJ Stroud. A couple good games, maybe he was just going up against easy defenses. Is he legit? The Texans, we don't really know. Obviously, CJ Stroud was legit and was great for the rest of the year. So I think I need to be more aggressive with pursuing guys on the waiver wire this upcoming season. And, guys like Cam Akers, who is on some of my rosters, you want to hold out hope for the guys that you drafted, because just like real NFL teams, you spend draft capital on a guy in your fantasy draft, just like they take someone in the first round. You're going to hang on to them a little bit longer than maybe you should, rather than picking up the free agent who could help your team right away.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I whiffed on a lot of those guys as well. And the one big takeaway from last year that I'm considering, and I've been playing fantasy for a long time and have stuck by this one principle, that I don't like the handcuff for running backs. I've just never bought into it. I'd rather have another team's backup to where there's that opportunity that, all right, if I got 3-4 running backs, they're all healthy, great. Now I'm loving life. Well, where it bit me bad last year was Nick Chubb goes down first week. And that was my number 1 draft pick in a league. And I didn't have Jerome Ford. And so if I would have had Jerome Ford last year, I at least would have been able to stay afloat because he had some nice games last year. I don't know if I'm completely all in on handcuffing, but I think I'm learning from that to say, all right, let me at least consider it more than I have in the past, where I've sort of written off that strategy. Because I think it could be a wiser decision. So what are those mistakes for you as a listener? If you're watching on Facebook or any social media, you can leave your comments. What did you learn from those mistakes last year, and how can we be better for this year? And with Harrison back, so last year we started the segment, or maybe it was even the year before, where Harrison gives us players that are on the waiver wire. We ask him, are they legit? And today we're going to do it just as we take a look at everybody's on the waiver wire at this point, right? So we're all available to draft, especially in redrafts. So who are some of these players that you are really buying into? And maybe we'll just kind of go one at a time. I'll respond. So give us the first player. Who's legit today?
So the first guy that I think is going to be legit for the upcoming NFL season is Brian Thomas Jr., rookie wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, I know Marvin Harrison's getting a lot of attention, and obviously Malik Neighbors as well. They're both incredible. But you have to pay 2nd-round draft picks to take these 2 rookie wide receivers as the highest drafted rookie wide receivers ever. And I think Brian Thomas Jr. actually has the best scenario of any rookie wide receiver, maybe outside of Marvin Harrison, this upcoming season. When you look at what he's walking into, it's very similar to what Jamar Chase walked into as a rookie. And now don't think that I'm saying he's going to be Jamar Chase, but Chase was a guy who went in the 6th round of his rookie season in fantasy because we were worried about, how is he going to fit in with Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins already there. But it became very clear already that he was the number 1 wide receiver on the team. And we're like, oh, definitely should have seen this coming with Jamar Chase. I think that's really similar to Brian Thomas's situation where Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones leave 200 targets on the table with their departures in free agency. And yes, Christian Kirk is still there, but he's a slot receiver. He's not going to take over and become a 1,600, 10 touchdown guy. And they brought in Gabe Davis as well, who I also, some people are excited about him, but I think he's just been a deep threat at this point in his career. He hasn't really ever had more than 800 receiving yards, 50 receptions in a season, really long average depth of target. I think he's there to play that specific role. But I think Brian Thomas Jr. is the guy who can come in and be the alpha number 1 receiver in this offense. He's the highest draft capital out of all of them, the only one who was taken in the 1st round. He ran a 4.33 at the 40-yard dash this year at 6'3", big, strong, fast, similar build to DK Metcalf, and was super productive in college with 17 touchdowns at LSU last year. The water may be muddy right now with who's going to be the number 1 in Jacksonville, but this is a good offense. They still have Trevor Lawrence, a little bit disappointing last year, but I think they're going to be better this year. And by the end of the year, I think Thomas will take over as the number 1 go-to guy in Jacksonville and easily has the potential to finish as a top 20 fantasy wide receiver.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by him as well as Jacksonville. And a little bit later, we're going to talk really kind of overview on a number of teams that we like. And I liked Jacksonville last year, and they were somewhat of a disappointment. But you still look across and you go, man, Travis Etienne is a legit stud. I want him again. I think he's somewhat discounted a little bit, but he's still the guy there. He's going to get a ton of carries. And to your point with Brian Thomas Jr., he has the chance, the path to be the number 1 guy. With that said, I'm not overlooking Christian Kirk. I think he is valuable. He's going later in drafts. You can draft him as a wide receiver 3, and I think he'll absolutely live up to that. But it has the potential to be a wide receiver 2 on your team as well. And so with Brian Thomas Jr., those 2 guys will complement each other well. And so I'm with you. I like Jacksonville's receiver and then receivers because even Gabe Davis, a nice free agent pickup, he's going way late in drafts. You can get him as your wide receiver 4 or 5. He'll have some big games. You may not, but as a flex play during bye weeks, you might hit on him and have a nice week.
Yeah. So I think Jacksonville, sort of has the perfect wide receiver for whatever the makeup of your team is. Like when in doubt, no matter how your first 5 rounds went, take a Jacksonville receiver late. Because if you want, if you got some steady guys early on, but you need that breakout candidate, take Brian Thomas Jr. Let's say you got a little more inconsistent week-to-week guys like a Jalen Waddle as your wide receiver 2, and you want someone steady in your flex, take Christian Kirk. And if you want that, big week-to-week boom or bust, take Gabe Davis. All of them, I think, are going to have good seasons, and they all provide value in fantasy. But if I'm, shooting for the moon, or if I want to invest in a rookie wide receiver, I'm going to go Brian Thomas Jr.
I like it. And I don't think that the Jags are sort of the hype, cute team that everybody likes in fantasy. People are kind of overlooking them. And so I do think there's good value for all their guys. Even Evan Ingram, he's a solid tight end. So throw him into the mix. So a lot of weapons for Trevor Lawrence. Again, he was somewhat disappointing, but he wasn't bad. A little bit of injury, but no, he's a stud. He's a former number 1 pick. Jacksonville's going to be all right. They got Doug Peterson. They're solid. I'm in on Jacksonville. All right. Speaking of hype, all right, the Houston Texans are very hyped, right? We love the Texans. I was all in on them last year, so I benefited from that, Nico Collins especially. But one guy emerged, Tank Dell. Is he legit going into this season, Harrison?
Tank Dell is absolutely legit going into this season. Of the three Houston Texan wide receivers that are going early in drafts right now, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs. Tank Dell is the one that I want, and he's actually being drafted the third out of all of his teammates. Last year he put up a 1,200 yard and 12 touchdown pace as a rookie. Obviously, he was injured for the back half of the season, so he didn't get to hit that mark fully. But he was incredible during the first half. And I don't think he's going to take that big of a step back with the addition of Diggs because of the role that he plays in this offense for the Houston Texans. He's the team's deep threat. He had an average depth of target of 14.3 yards. They're targeting him down the field. And I think Nico Collins and Diggs are actually going to eat into each other's, production more because they had very similar average depth of targets last year. They play a similar role in the offense. Nico Collins, 10.9 yards depth of target. Diggs, 10.3. So I think his role, Tank Dell's role, is safe as the deep threat. Plus, we know that CJ Stroud loves Tank Dell. CJ Stroud this offseason was asked to build his perfect NFL receiving core on a podcast. And we all know how important podcasts are in predicting the future of sports now. Look at LeBron and JJ Redick, McCall Bridges to the New York Knicks. It all starts from podcasts. And he listed Tank Dell alongside Devontae Adams and Jamar Chase as the three wide receivers that he wanted to be throwing the ball to. Didn't mention Stephon Diggs, didn't mention Nico Collins. I think Tank Dell's the guy that he likes. He sees how explosive he is. He wants to get him the ball deep downfield. And I think Dell is going to have another incredible season for the Houston Texans. And if you want to get in on the Texans, also doesn't hurt that he's going third of those three wide receivers. He's definitely the easiest one to get in drafts.
I like it. And you look at his athleticism, his profile, he's talented. And in limited time last year, he was unbelievable. My big concern, though, of course, is the injuries. Now, when you get injured as a rookie, it's just, hey, maybe he got injured. Or, is this guy injury prone? So going into the second year, there's not enough data for me to know, wait, is there an injury concern here or was it a fluke? So there's some hesitation in that regard. But I believe Nico Collins is your solid guy that he's going to get plenty of targets, plenty of touchdowns, maybe not as many big plays as Tank Dell when healthy. I'm overlooking Stephon Diggs. I'm not interested. I'm not drafting him.
I agree.
I don't know what went on in Buffalo last year, and maybe he has this resurgence, and that's fine. I'm not going to take that risk. I'm not interested in that risk because I think you also have to factor in, can CJ Stroud keep up with the pace that he had last year? They were the cute team last year coming out of nowhere, the up and coming team. Does that trajectory continue or do they plateau a little bit or cool down a little bit? So there is some hesitation there because you're paying a premium. When you draft Texans players, you are paying a premium for them. Whereas last year they were steals. Tank Dell was a free agent, right? We got him off the waiver wire. I got him in one league and then I traded him. I don't think I fully maximized him. But anyway, so I understand your take on Tank. I don't necessarily disagree. I'm factoring in a number of things with the Texans there. Diggs, no thanks. I will say something that I have a prejudice toward are older wide receivers. And there's plenty of data to where you should be weary of them. But talk about mistakes. We talked about mistakes earlier. I always made the mistake of, Mike Evans is done. Forget Mike Evans. He's no good. And what does he do? Year after year after year. So there are some receivers that, for me, it's like, I'm out on Devontae Adams. Be careful because Devontae Adams, again, same kind of guy, year after year after year. And so Diggs somewhat falls into that category, but he's coming off a bad year, or at least a disappointing year considering what he's done in the past.
Yeah, I think Diggs is actually really interesting because obviously if you had him, you were disappointed in fantasy. But I was looking back and he had 160 targets last year still. Everyone was like, oh, Diggs fell asleep towards the end of the season. Why aren't we getting Diggs the ball? But he was still like a top 5 targeted wide receiver in the NFL. But, will those targets continue now that he has Nico Collins and Tank Dell to compete with, not Gabe Davis? So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, different style quarterback too. So yeah, I'm intrigued by it for sure. But yeah, again, the older wide receivers cause me to pause. I like guys right in their prime, right in the middle of their prime, and that's why Nico is my kind of guy. All right, let's see. You got a couple more guys that you believe are legit. We'll kind of run through those. Give me a running back that you believe is really legit.
Yeah. So James Cook, I was super high on James Cook last year. I thought he was a great value. And I'm even higher on him going into this season. He finishes the RB12 last year, despite only having 2 rushing touchdowns, which is just unbelievable. And after Joe Brady took over as the offensive coordinator in Buffalo, the Bills were actually one of the most run heavy teams in the NFL. And Cook was averaging 20 touches per game in that offense. He also has the talent we saw last year to take advantage of that opportunity. He's only one of 17 running backs in NFL history to average over 5 yards per carry over his first 300 rushing attempts. And spoiler alert, the other 16 guys on that list are all either Hall of Famers or will probably be heading to the Hall of Fame. Now, I'm not saying Cook's going to be a Hall of Famer, but there's not a lot of guys who fizzle out that are that productive that early in his career. Now, Cook's being drafted this year right now as the RB14, like I said, despite finishing as the RB12 last year. And outside of injury, I just don't see a world where he finishes below that because, he can't really have less than 2 touchdowns. I mean, he could have 0, but that's probably not going to happen. And I don't think his role is going to reduce at all. So even if just a few touchdowns fall his way and he scores, 5 or 6, I think you're looking at a top 10 running back, possibly even top 6, 5 upside if everything breaks right to him. But I think he's just a great value, even if he just reproduces on what he did last year.
Buffalo is fascinating because they're being discounted. Buffalo Bills players are being discounted. I talked about it on last week's show, I think, because I'm all in on Dalton Kincaid as a tight end that I want to target. But I am with you on James Cook as well. He is undervalued, underrated, and the opportunity this year is tremendous. So I want James Cook on some teams. There's no doubt about it. So I'm right there with you on that. All right, let's talk about a couple guys that you don't believe are legit. Who is not legit that you're avoiding in fantasy drafts this year?
So we mentioned it earlier, being a little wary of CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans. And I love CJ Stroud as a player. I think they're going to be a good team, but I am not in on CJ Stroud being legit for this fantasy season, especially where he is going in drafts right now. If you look at some quarterbacks from last year, I'm going to list 3 guys. All of them made the playoffs last year in their first full season as an NFL starter. QB1 had 26 total touchdowns and finishes the QB9. QB2 had 33 total touchdowns, finishes the QB6. And QB3 had 36 total touchdowns and finishes the QB5. But if you look at those names, the first guy I mentioned is going the highest in drafts right now, despite having the worst season last year. And that's CJ Stroud. The other 2 guys are Jordan Love and Brock Purdy, who had incredible fantasy seasons. CJ Stroud is going as a QB5, while Purdy and Love are both going as the QB11 and QB8s in drafts. And I don't think CJ Stroud can pay off on that QB5 range where he's being drafted. I get the addition of Joe Mixon and Stephon Diggs, but in order for a QB to really be worth, a top 5 QB draft pick, they have to provide the spike weeks where they're winning you a week and providing so much value over picking up a guy who's, on the waiver wire or a later round guy. And Stroud just didn't do that last year. He finished as a top 5, weekly QB only twice. Guys like Derek Carr and Geno Smith also finished with the same amount of top 5 weeks. And guys like Anthony Richardson, who only played in 4 games last year, which shows you the upside that having a running quarterback can bring you. I mean, if you want a pocket passer QB to finish as a top 5 QB, it's really got to be like either Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow, where they're throwing for, 35 plus touchdowns. Like I mentioned before, Jordan Love had 36 touchdowns and, finished as the QB5. So you got to be thinking CJ Stroud's at least got to hit that. He's got to have at least a 10 touchdown increase this year. Is he able to do that with the Texans now facing one of the hardest schedules in the NFL when they faced one of the easiest last year? I don't know. I think he's going to be good, but I just don't see him being worth, a 5th round, 4th round draft pick in fantasy drafts.
I agree. And I love Stroud, big fan. But I just look at so far doing mock drafts, it's amazing the caliber of quarterback you can get late. You mentioned Jordan Love. You mentioned Brock Purdy. Those guys are going late, and they're so valuable, especially in the offenses and the weapons that they have. You can wait on those guys. And then, throw in Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence. Those guys are going late. And even Dak Prescott, a lot of questions around him, but we know how good he is when healthy with CeeDee Lamb, if they can get that contract situated. I think you can get Dak at a discount this year too. So you don't have to reach and spend a top pick to get Stroud. I'm with you. I think you'll be disappointed based on when you take him and who you left on the board at other positions that you could have loaded up on, getting that extra receiver, that top running back type of thing. So, yeah, that's good stuff. All right, give me a tight end, because I find who you put on this list, I'm intrigued by. Who is not legit? What tight end is not legit?
So again, it hurts me to say this because I think he's an absolutely fantastic player and is going to have a great career. But Brock Bowers is not legit for this upcoming fantasy season. Rookie tight ends typically don't fare very well for fantasy. Now, last year was an exception. We saw Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid both have great rookie seasons. However, the situations they stepped into were a lot different. They were one of the top 3 targets on a great offense with a great QB. Bowers is not as lucky as they are going to, the Las Vegas Raiders. They do not project to have a top offense with either Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew at QB, and he will have to compete with Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers for targets. Now, that wasn't an issue for guys like Kincaid and Laporta last year, having to compete with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Stephon Diggs, but they were getting a slice of a much larger pie than, what Brock Bowers is going to be working with. Brock Bowers is working with a little personal pan pizza here, and he's getting the third crack at it after Devontae Adams. He's not getting an extra large pie here. And you look at other guys who are, great tight ends who had great careers, like TJ Hawkinson and Eric Ebron. Both top 10 picks, good careers, but they finished as the tight end 33 and 31 in their rookie seasons. Even Kyle Pitts, the highest drafted tight end ever, and he had 1,000 yards his rookie season, only finished as the tight end 10. Right now, Bowers is being drafted as the tight end 10. If I had to bet that he finishes on one side of that, I don't think he finishes lower than tight end 10. I think he ends up disappointing on that ADP. And, he may be solid, but I think there's other guys going much later who are going to provide similar value to him. Because even if he does have a great season like Pitts did, he just doesn't have top 6 upside for me.
Man, I'm in agreement once again. I'm with you. I'm intrigued by him because of the talent. And if he happened to slip, there is a spot where, yes, I would take him for sure. But when you expect him to be a come in and be Sam Laporta, I think it's unrealistic. I agree with that. And the Raiders, for the most part, are pretty avoidable. I like the value of Zamir White. I'm going to be keeping him in a couple leagues because I got him for cheap last year. And so I like, he'll have volume, he'll have opportunity. He's probably not going to be a top 5, but he'll be a solid RB2 or RB3 this year. And then I like Jacoby Myers because he was good last year. And again, you can kind of get him late, but I'm not willing to pay for Adams. I love Gardner Minshew, but it's the ceiling. There's definitely a ceiling there. And then to your point, that affects Bowers. So Brock Bowers, what a name. He's a stud. So he's one of those guys, if you're playing Dynasty, you want him.
Yeah, definitely in Dynasty, or even as a tight end too. If you want to take him as a second tight end, maybe a breakout because you took a guy like Evan Ingram early on or something like that. But I think it would be a mistake because he's being drafted as a tight end 1 to have him be your starting tight end week 1 of the fantasy season. I do not think you're going to be happy with that.
We've seen a lot of hyped guys, young guys. Noah Fant comes to mind. Just that you expect they're going to come in right away, and it usually takes time. It really does. So it's a trap. I think the Bowers is a trap this year, so don't fall for that one. All right, let's jump into a few teams that I want to discuss for the next few minutes, and we'll wrap up today's show. But excited to be talking fantasy. Thanks everybody listening and watching. Leave your comments wherever you are watching or listening right now, and always love hearing from you. You can email me, Bryce at fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Let me know your thoughts as well. But let's talk about the teams that we want to target their players. So teams that we love their offense. These are the teams that we are in on. Give me the running back, the quarterback, the wide receiver. I just want somebody from that offense based on value, based on potential. Who are these teams? And I've already mentioned two of them, the Bills and the Jaguars. I love the value of both those teams. So we've already talked about them. Let me jump in on the Seahawks because I think this could be surprising. And Aaron, our producer, is a Seahawks fan. But I like McDonald coming in as their new head coach, a change, switching things up. And you know how much I love DK Metcalf. I like JSN in the second year coming in with, the post hype opportunity there. Tyler Lockett probably will take a step back. I probably don't want Lockett. But he's always solid. If he does slip in drafts, he's still probably worth going after. And you got Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet. Either one of those at the right price is good. And then you get Geno for cheap as your QB2, but has potential with all these weapons. He could have a big year. So I like Seattle. They're not one of those, everybody loves Seattle type of teams. So I like the discount there. And so I'm in on them. Is there a team that you like, and you can give me your thoughts on Seattle as well?
Yeah, so I'm in on Seattle as well. This has been a pretty old-fashioned offense the last, decade with Pete Carroll, two tight ends, run the ball, despite them having some good passing success and weapons. But they bring in a new offensive coordinator who was at Washington last year with Michael Penix. We all know how explosive Washington's offense was, spread the ball out, multiple great receivers. I think it's going to translate very well to what Seattle wants to do. I really like JSN as a second-year wide receiver. I think he was misutilized as a rookie. He had a really, really close to the line of scrimmage, average depth of target, was mainly just getting screens and slants. I think he's a lot more explosive player than that. And then I also kind of like Noah Fant as well as a sleeper tight end. I think he's someone that's going to be consistent week to week, 4 receptions for 50 yards kind of guy, where it's week 8 in the NFL season and you look at the waiver wire and you're like, wait, Noah Fant's the tight end 11 or the tight end 9 on the season? How did that happen? I think he's going to be a surprisingly good option as well. Another team that I really like to have a bounce back season is the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, everyone is written off the Cincinnati Bengals, it feels like, because of how great Baltimore was. People are talking about Cleveland with maybe Deshaun Watson being healthy. What's their full potential? They made the playoffs last year. Joe Flacco was exciting. The Steelers get Russell Wilson. It feels like we're forgetting that the Cincinnati Bengals were a top 3 offense pretty consistently in the NFL before last season and Joe Burrow's injury. And I know if you drafted Joe Burrow last year, obviously you were super disappointed. First couple weeks of the season, he was clearly not right. But the month before he got injured, those weeks like 5 through 10, he was putting up elite fantasy numbers. He was playing fantastic, on pace for, nearly 5,000 yards and 35 touchdowns, back to his normal self after he was sort of bothered by the ankle injury early on. And, Jamar Chase is still there. They bring back T. Higgins. They draft Jermaine Burton out of Alabama, who can really fly. He's a great deep threat. And they bring in Zach Moss as a nice running back as well to replace Joe Mixon. They improve the offensive line, which they've been needing to do for the last few years. I think the Bengals are going to come back and surprise a lot of people and remind them that, hey, we're one of the top offenses in the NFL too. Joe Burrow is a top 5, top 3 QB in the NFL. We can definitely make some noise this season.
I'm in on the Bengals. Let's go. I'm probably not as high on T. Higgins, just where you got to get him. I'm not thrilled about him. But other than that, I want Joe Burrow. And on last week's show, I was torn between Zach Moss and Chase Brown. I've made my decision, Harrison. You know what direction I'm going? Chase Brown. I want Chase Brown. So I'm going to avoid Moss. I just think because of his age, he's 27. Chase Brown's the young guy. The way he finished last year, I think Chase Brown is the running back to own in Cincinnati, especially you get him so late. Double-digit rounds is when you can take him. So I like that. I like that value. So I'm in on the Bengals. All right, we'll wrap up with this. Who are the teams that you're avoiding their players? And maybe not completely, but just in general, you're staying away from them based on they're too hyped or they're too bad. And those are kind of the two. For me, that's how I'm making my decision. I'm like, I'm not paying the hype price. And then that team is just horrendous. I just don't want to deal with them. So I will start, and I'll just do real quick. The Kansas City Chiefs, you pay the Super Bowl price. And I'm not sure that I want to do that because I have a feeling they're going to they'll come out slow out of the gate. And I like to win fantasy. You want to win at least a little bit early on. You don't want to dig out of a hole. Whereas I know they'll get hot later in the year and all that kind of thing. But with Travis Kelce, as confident as I was in him last year, I'm not quite as confident in him this year. The wide receiver situation, I think I like Marquise Brown as sort of the receiver in that group. And if I can get him for a good deal, I'm good with that. A lot of questions with Rashee Rice. Worthy is I think, going to be a hyped rookie that you want to get. So I'm just not sure. And then Pacheco is good, but he's gaining some hype too. Again, at the right price, I like Pacheco, but I'm hesitant. And then, of course, Mahomes, you got to draft early. And I'm waiting on quarterbacks. So that's the team. I know they're good. I know they're awesome. They'll be putting up big numbers eventually. They'll be in the Super Bowl contention again, you expect. But from a fantasy standpoint, I can't always pay that price. Maybe one guy, but I can't go, oh, just give me Kansas City every be careful. And then the team that's just bad, I think it's the Vikings. I think the Vikings are the team that I don't feel good about, and I'm worried about going in on really any of their players. Like even Justin Jefferson, as awesome as he is, I don't want him in the fifth. I told you last week on the show, the fifth pick. No thanks. So a lot of question marks there. I'm out on the Vikings. I will be avoiding them for the most part. So how about for you?
Yeah, the Vikings one is interesting because a lot of talent there, but just how much can Sam Darnold, utilize that talent? We'll see. I mean, he's had some growth under Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan said he was like Steve Young or something like that a few years ago, which I don't know. I don't know if that's end up going to be the case, but I guess we'll see. Maybe he's Steve Young and he has a late career resurgence. But yeah, the Vikings are definitely, I think the guys are going too high, even though I don't think they'll be terrible. I think they're too high. A team that I'm pretty much out on this season is the Cleveland Browns, despite them making the playoffs last year. And, Kevin Stefanski, coach of the year, they had Joe Flacco ended the season, but we've been like 3 years into the Deshaun Watson experiment now, and he's either not been healthy or not been good. And I don't want Jameis Winston having to come in and support my fantasy stars on my team. I'm out on Amari Cooper. They bring in Jerry Jeudy, who everyone's been waiting to break out for his entire career, but I don't really see it happening. David Njoku I like as a player, but again, I just don't think I'm going to pay the price for him in drafts, especially with the unsurety at QB. And then look at the running back room. I mean, Nick Chubb's fantastic. We were all in on Nick Chubb last year. When healthy, he's one of the best running backs in the NFL, obviously. But he had a catastrophic injury, late in the season last year. Obviously, you're going to see the training camp report saying, oh, he's good to go, or he's out there taking carries and running routes. But, history tells us that unless you're Adrian Peterson, which, Nick Chubb might just be Adrian Peterson, he's that good. Typically, you do not want to draft running backs the year after them having, a terrible ACL, MCL injury. It just does not bode well. Plus, he's getting up there in age, has a lot of carries under his belt. I also I just don't know, are they going to force him back too early and he's not going to be super efficient, which then takes away touches from Jerome Ford, I'm fine taking a shot on because he's just going for free in drafts right now. But the whole wide receiver situation, running back situation, QB, it all just seems really messy to me in Cleveland. They'll probably end up being a good team because if you can make the playoffs with Joe Flacco, doesn't really matter what's going on. They can probably make the playoffs again this year or at least finish the winning record. But I don't know. I just don't want to touch any of their fantasy assets.
Yeah, I think that's probably a safe bet. I'd agree with that. The one interesting thing is ESPN has an article that they asked a bunch of front office people, scouts, whoever, who are the best running backs in the NFL. And Nick Chubb was number 3. And so that's kind of crazy. Like, whoa, third best running back. And I mean, this is not because he's led the league in rushing and all that, but coming off an injury, of course. So you have to consider the talent there, and he is going fairly late. So if that continues, we'll see what the reports are out of training camp. Nick Chubb is interesting, but in general, I don't feel great about Cleveland. A lot of question marks, especially when you have a question mark at quarterback, that filters out. And you're right. The Deshaun Watson experiment has not been great. Joe Flacco was the legend last year. All right, last thing. So you just used the word unsurety. And so, wait, is that a real word? What is that? Do we have a new segment here? I mean, the last mistake you made was legit. And now we have a whole segment. So unsurety, I looked it up. It technically is a word,
Okay.
but it looks like it's from like the old Middle English period. So I'm not sure that anyone else is using it. That's why it caught me off guard. I'm not sure that you meant to use it, but there you go. You're dealing with some unsurety today. So I like it. So I just have to call you out on that. That's it. That's all we got. All right, buddy. Well, hey, great job today. Great insight. Appreciate all your thoughts. And hey, we're not always going to agree, but hey, today we agreed on a lot of these players. But as the weeks get going, I'm sure we'll disagree on a few players and teams. And so send in your questions. We'll discuss over the next few weeks. One thing we didn't get to today, we'll push it to the next show. We're going to look at some of the teams with new quarterbacks and how we feel about the fantasy players on those teams. And how will Russell Wilson do in Pittsburgh? Who are we targeting? We'll take a look at that on our next episode. But Harrison, great job. Thank you. Thanks to Aaron. I'm Bryce. I'm a fantasy manager who follows Jesus. I believe in the good news that he died on the cross for my sin. He was resurrected. And through faith, I've been saved by his grace. I hope that is true for you as well. And I hope you'll join me as we live life as fantasy managers who follow Jesus together. Have a great rest of your day. Be sure to check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Become a member for free today. And we'll talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast.